Today we're taking a look back to our podcast infancy. Yes, we're going back to how to save the comic book industry. Is our advice still apropos, or do we need to update our hot takes? The Byword starts now. Welcome to episode 168 of the Nerd Byword, the only podcast that is willing to admit when we're wrong. Just kidding. No, in all seriousness, today we are going to take a look back to one of our very first episodes, episode 2, How to Save the Comics, which was recorded and released on June 8th, 2020. So it'd be interesting to kind of revisit this topic on how to save the comic books. Revisiting these takes, and are they still relevant, or do we need to adjust for a 3-year difference? But first, as always, it is time for Nerd News. All right, Dave, hit me with it.
AI, my friend, AI, back in the news. This one from a different website than I would usually peruse, but I came across this in my extensive reading on AI and how it's influencing the comic book industry. This is not directly comic book industry, but comic book adjacent, and I thought it was very interesting to talk about. So this is from a website called Creative Block. Block here spelled with a Q, which deals with graphic design, web design, and so on and so forth. And here a gentleman by the name of Paul Hatton reported on a little kerfuffle that was posted on Twix, the artist formerly known as Twitter, right? So here is the story. Apparently there is a concept artist who goes by the moniker of DoFresh on Twix. And he has been, is pretty experienced freelance concept artist and illustrator, apparently. And he received a call, according to his various Twitter posts. Yes, I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm trying, man. And he received a call from an advertising company who needed his services. He had worked with them previously, but they hadn't worked together for a while. And it was going quite well, apparently, until the company representative said that they only reached out because their in-house AI technician was too busy, and they were therefore forced to find an artist. And so this is where DoFresh kind of saw red. He is a very... or they, let's say they, because I'm not sure if it's he or she. Let's go with they, or maybe it is they. I really don't know. They are a proponent of no NFTs and no AI, and so DoFresh was the wrong person to contact and talking about using an in-house AI technician. And so they posted, are we artists and illustrators bleeped? Received a call this morning from an advertising company. We used to work together a lot during the last few years, but rather rarely lately. And then goes into, hey, I'm not sure what we're going to do now, considering that people are having in-house AI technicians to actually create their art now instead of hiring actual live artists. DoFresh posts, I am afraid that even with laws protecting artists, the damage is already done. Within a few years, art will probably be a hobby for wealthy people and definitely won't be able to make a living. And this is obviously really concerning, especially considering how deeply, our podcast is involved in the comic book industry. We can see how this is going to potentially affect the creation of comic books as companies, especially at stuff like the big two, DC, Marvel, which are ultimately corporate owned, might shift towards trying to use AI models to take shortcuts with their art and hire less artists, thereby cutting out the overhead and making more profit. I find this obviously extremely troubling. I've spoken about this before, and so have you, Kris, how we are not proponents of using AI to replace human creativity and human labor. But we've also kind of been at the point where we've been talking about this in very theoretical, um, you know, situations, because the general sense, I think, has been that AI is not quite there yet to actually fully replace, human creativity. But it appears that there are companies already, at this point, even with the technology being sort of in its infancy, already moving away from live artists to these AI creations, and so the future is now, and it's extremely troubling, Chris.
One of the things that is just truly upsetting about it is how quickly society as a whole just wants to take the quickest path. And a lot of people see AI generators as one of those quick paths to like getting the desired result, and not having to wait for an artist to complete something, not waiting for a commission or paid work from a freelance artist. So like I think that's the most disheartening thing, and that's not exclusive to comic books, that's not exclusive to any of the nerd centric things that we cover on our show. Like, I talked about this before. Like, I struggle with my kids using online translators to complete their work. We struggle with kids being tempted by things like Chat GPT. And I think, like, this is probably the most unsettling thing is, like you say, AI is not there yet as a whole cloth replacement for individual artists. But if we just keep feeding these search engines with stuff, we're kind of expediting that process. You know what I mean? I would like to think that the emboldening of individual creators, like what we saw with the WGA, what we're continuing to see with SAG-AFTRA during these strikes, I would like to think that would hold some power there to kind of prevent this. But I'm like, it's almost feel like I'm grasping at straws here because of just the overwhelming sense of urgency in the world. It would seem the worldwide populace just wants things fast. They want it now. They don't want to wait. If a web page takes more than 30 seconds to load, there must be something deeply wrong with the computer or the internet, or like it's just an unsettling thing. So here's hoping that creators' rights and striking and refusing to work with companies that participate in this will mean something. But I don't have high hopes, and I'm sorry if that comes across as pessimistic.
And I do believe we're at the point now where legally, I think it is time for governments to step in here. I think
absolutely.
So the AI models themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, right? I mean, the problem ultimately is what they feed them to teach them, right? And what they're doing is they're feeding these AI models essentially copyrighted works, right? And then so when these AI models generate something, it is very clear, and you can see it time and time again, which artists are specifically being generated. I've seen people, particularly on social media, specifically say, well, I fed this AI model, I want it to look like blank artist. And it's not that the AI is creating something original. They are literally regurgitating stuff that they've been fed, right? This is how AI learns, by just looking at all, quote unquote, looking at all these different artists' actual work. And I think there needs to be some kind of law that says that you cannot train AI models on copyrighted works unless the artist has given permission, whether that is through compensation or whatever, yeah. Right?
Because they're so quick to strike something down. Like if you share a clip on social media or like pirating streams or torrenting or anything like that, they're so quick to strike down things like that. Why is this any different?
Because ultimately you're dealing with the individual worker and individual creativity and not corporate owned IP. When you have a massive corporation going after something, it gets done. But when you have individual artists trying to protect their livelihood, apparently that is not as big of a priority because there's not as much raw cash involved. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But this is ultimately an issue of intellectual property. It's not so much about the technology. And I've said here before, there are workflow things that you can do with AI that even I find very interesting, but these are things that are not based on copyrighted works necessarily. Feed it a piece of text to level it for students of various reading abilities, for example. That sort of stuff is extremely useful. So I am not, anytime somebody says anything against AI on social media, the AI bros come out and start throwing around boomer and stuff like that. And I'm not such an old fogey that I don't appreciate technology and what it can do, for humanity. But the difference is I wanted to do for humanity, not replace humanity, right? And so ultimately, I just think it's really, really time that we deal with the intellectual property component of this. Imagine, and I think we're going to have to get to this point where we have like an AI model that can make like cartoons, right? And then you just feed it all the Disney cartoons and suddenly it spits out Disney cartoons for you, and then Disney is going to be like, now, wait a minute, now I don't want it, and then we might get something done. But it's very troubling how long it's taking, lawmakers to catch up with this technology and do something to protect individual artists who are clearly being ripped off by this technology. They're quick to step into anything as long as they think they can, get some kind of advantage out of it is the problem. All right, let's talk CD Projekt Red. Really good developer. I'm interested to hear what you got to say here, Kris. What's new?
Well, CD Projekt Red, who you and I both have an affinity for based on their Witcher video games and the production company. Little game called Cyberpunk. You heard of it, Dave? Cyberpunk 2077. You may have
I heard many things.
Well, so famously was released in 2020, and it was a dumpster fire to say the least. Numerous updates, bug fixes, all of this. It was delisted from the PlayStation Store. It was a hot, bubbly, sick mess. It did rebound after the big 2.0 update, however, and sold well. So it also followed up with a popular Netflix anime that I was not aware of until I did research into this story. So it kind of gave a boost. And then anytime you attach Keanu Reeves to an IP, you're bound to get popularity in that. And now they have released a single expansion for Cyberpunk 2077. And according to Kotaku and reports, CD Projekt Red spent over $80 million on this one expansion. So it's just fascinating to me that something that was so maligned at release, they have gone doubled down on something that was so widely criticized. Now, I did play Cyberpunk 2077 and enjoyed it. I wish it had a larger scope. I wish there was much more time, like that I could be invested in it. I might be looking at Phantom Liberty in purchasing it. But then I also saw on IGN that they are announcing a live action Cyberpunk 2077 project. Now, you and I have had this discussion at length of, do we need a live action everything?
No.
It's interesting, and I'm a big fan of CD Projekt Red, love The Witcher to the moon and back. It's interesting that as chaotic as a release as Cyberpunk was, that they are now doubling and tripling down on this, spending so much money on first this expansion and now very early stages, but some cool names attached to this, cool acclamations. The production, they're producing it with Anonymous Content, which is the production company that did True Detective, Mr. Robot, award-winning films like The Revenant and Spotlight. And so like there's some cool names attached to this, creatively speaking. But I'm just honestly shocked. I don't know if I'm like intrigued by this very much. But it's just wild to kind of see how the tables have turned here.
Oh, I think everybody loves a comeback story, and CD Projekt Red has been, making good products for a while, and so seeing them flounder as strongly as they did with Cyberpunk 2077 was kind of disappointing. I think there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I read, a handful of stories about it that were, more about the corporate arm of the company trying to push things out too fast, and they weren't really done cooking, basically. And now that they've had some more time, I'm not surprised that they were able to right the ship and improve the game tremendously. It's interesting, too, because Cyberpunk had such a poor reception when it was first released. And now, flip side, I've seen several of these, how can I put this nicely? Let's say anti-Starfield bros online specifically pointing to Cyberpunk 2077 as this is why Starfield sucks, because Cyberpunk 2077 looks so much better. And I'm like, dude, just a few years ago, everybody was dunking on Cyberpunk 2077. Can you simmer down a little bit? So, I'm glad that they're making a comeback the way they are. I think it's just the expansion of everything into franchising and live action adaptations and all that. I'm losing interest in that very, very quickly. I'm okay with a video game sometimes just being a video game, in a movie just sometimes being a movie. And an animated feature, very importantly, just kind of being an animated feature, right? Not every cartoon needs a live action, quote unquote, remake. And live action in quotation marks sometimes. If you look at the quote unquote live action remake of The Lion King that Disney put out, for example, it's just basically CG finished. It's still animated, just at higher resolution. So I'm not a big fan of that. I think it is fine for a piece of media to be specific to a specific medium, if that makes sense, without it getting adapted and transformed over and over again. But I understand where they're coming from, because they're just maximizing profits, which is what they're supposed to do, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. But I prefer when something kind of stands on its own 2 feet. I have specifically not touched Cyberpunk 2077 because I wanted them to have a couple of years to iron out their problems. And it's starting to sound like they about have, so it might be time for me to actually give the game a shot now.
Yeah, it was a fun play. I had a good time playing it once they fixed all that stuff. I also waited until that second big update, and you know me, that big digital discount in the shop. But as someone who is the lead evangelist for Starfield, Dave, you better hold me back. I have completed I've completed the game, the new game plus. I'm almost finished with it all over again. Like, it's just like on endless repeat. Like, it's one of those games for me that, like, you go to one of those games where you're constantly thinking about it. Like, I go to the grocery store and I'm like, I need to stock up on this. How much health is this snack gonna restore? If I eat this pack of Oreos, how much health am I gonna regain? It's just, and a lot of the stuff that you reference, it just seems like sour grapes. I don't want to say it's Sony fans, but I'm gonna say it's Sony fans. But yeah, Starfield is a masterpiece, absolute masterpiece, and you can miss me with that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it. I've read that the recent update on the Steam Deck is making huge strides and making able to play it on a Steam Deck, which I think is incredible. They're doing a lot of tweaking on the Steam Deck behind the scenes lately. There's a big 3.5 update that apparently is starting to make things playable on the deck that weren't before. So I'm thinking, I wait a little longer to get this thing tweaked. I lower the settings a little bit, and I can actually enjoy this on the Steam Deck, which would be heavenly for me because I love playing on that device. So I'm ready for it, man.
That sounds perfect, man. I'm telling you. And I'm playing it on the Series S, which, as fans of our show know, I'm not a big spec bro or anything like that, but it's one of the most gorgeous gaming experiences I've ever had. So much so that y'all know how I feel about Assassin's Creed. I bought Assassin's Creed Mirage, and I cannot bring myself to start it. I pre-ordered it and everything. I have not even hit start yet because I just keep playing Starfield. All right, that wraps up Nerd News. When we come back from our first break, our Byword Big Talk has us revisiting episode 2. Stick around. Welcome back to this week's main course, the entree segment. We call it our Byword. Big Talk. And keeping with that weird, strange analogy, because I'm just hungry, we're looking at leftovers. I don't know how well we can have leftovers 3 years later, but here we go. We are looking
There's some
back.
mold on these leftovers, man.
uh, we're looking back on how to save the comic book industry. We're going to look at the 3 suggestions or strategies that we had then. Do they need to be updated? Do they need to be tweaked? What do we need to do? So we've got a then and now for each of our strategies. Dave, what's first up for you?
When we first recorded that episode and we we're talking about saving the comic book industry, we were at the height sort of COVID pandemic malaise, and shopping was down, and numbers were down across the board for pretty much anything, but the comic book industry was taking a pretty heavy hit as well at the time. And so that certainly played a factor in the downturn. But although the industry has recovered somewhat from that downturn, I think it's fair to say that if you look at the breadth of history of the comic book industry, the American comic book market used to be much, much healthier, selling significantly more issues than they do today. And I think nobody really denies that. I think most books in like the top 11 to 25 or so sell anywhere between 40 and 50,000 maybe copies. And when you think that there used to be comic books that sold like a cool million copies, that is obviously not the same industry that it used to be. And as big comic book fans, it shouldn't be surprising that you and I in particular have a vested interest in the industry flourishing and doing well, and comic books proliferating, and everybody loving this medium, because it is an awesome medium. So in that, when we first recorded this episode and we talked about how to improve comic book prospects, one of my ideas was to downgrade, to simplify the art, to simplify the kind of paper used to something more newsprinty and cheaper, and thereby driving prices down and making comic books, a disposable hobby again, rather than a collector's market. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that, that the comic book market has become more collectors oriented and less about disposable income. And just like, reading a comic book and then leaving it on the subway or something, and the next person picks it up and reads it, people kind of gave up on their comic books and left them laying around, or gave them away frequently in the past because they were a cheap...
like a newspaper.
Like a newspaper, exactly. I don't think that's ever coming back, though. I think that idea was naive, especially since newsprint has changed too. With the newspaper industry also going through its pains, and there being less and less, daily in newspapers around the country now. Newsprint has also gone up in price a lot, and changing the industry back to being able to be printed on newsprint would mean that colorists would have to do their job completely differently, because the way color reproduces on newsprint is different. And I just don't think that this is ever coming back. So then the question becomes, what is a viable alternative if this downgrade idea is not going to work? And so to me, I think there are certain lessons that the American comic book industry should embrace from the Japanese manga market. Now,
pause. There are a whole lot of ideas that Americans need to adopt from Japanese culture, just broadly speaking.
Oh yeah, besides food, I don't know why the only thing that American culture seems to be interested in, quote unquote, amalgamating from other cultures is the food. Like, dude, there are many cultures that have great ideas. Go to Europe sometime and ask people about healthcare, for example. Anyways, that is neither here nor there. So as far as the manga situation, a lot of people that are, how can I put this nicely? Let's call them manga bros, right? That go on social media and proclaim the supremacy of all things Japanese comic books and denigrate the American comic book market constantly. They're really focused on content, right? I'm not really interested in that here. I'm much more interested in the way the publishing side works. One of the things that I think is really awesome in the manga market is, number one, size. I think it's very cool that they have this sort of trade paperback book size to them. They're very, easy to carry around, much easier than a floppy comic book. easy to fit in a backpack or something, much easier sometimes. And more importantly, they are thicker. I think the real ratio, and the thing that I was trying to get to when it came to the downgrade idea, is bang for buck. Right? I think that comic books are not perceived by the general non-comic reading public as a actual value. If you can go to Walmart and go to a bin and get a Blu-ray for $5 and be entertained for 2 hours, or you can spend $5 on Night Terror's Batman #2 of 2 for $4.99 and be entertained for a grand total of 10 minutes, the bang for the buck is not there, right? And so, although I love floppies and I love the serialized storytelling to a certain extent, I think that one of the things that we need to start doing is just making comic book phone books. These really big collections. You go out, you get one like Shonen Jump, for example. Sucker has all these different stories going on, right? And it's collected in a big fat magazine, and then you can sit down, you can read those. And then later on, those stories sort of get collected in these, trade paperbacks that are, really the size of a regular novel, paperback novel. And I think that that's actually a really cool business model, because you kind of still have the serialized nature, but you're like collecting them. Imagine, for example, you have from DC Comics a Superman magazine, right? That comes out once a month. It's big, it's fat, and it has Superman in it, and Action Comics in it, and Superboy and Supergirl, and any Superman related stories. And you have 10 different series, and you have 200-page whopper that you can get. Now, obviously, it costs more, sure, but you get such a bang for your buck at that point that you're much more interested, I think, in getting something like that. And if you only want to, follow one specific series, then you follow the collections, right? But I mean, I would be thrilled with something like that. I also think it would be fair to say that we ought to occasionally embrace black and white a little more. I think that that is one of the big keys for what makes manga so accessible, right? You're basically printing in a format that is reminiscent of a prose paperback, right? And because you in black and white, it's very, very affordable. These individual volumes, if you go to a bookstore, they fill shelves and shelves, because they're very popular, and they're really affordable in the grand scheme of things, especially compared to American comic books. So I think, embracing some of those lessons, at the very least mixing some of that into what the comic book market is already doing, would be a really, really smart idea to captivate maybe a new audience that is not considering American comic books right now.
It's so funny that you say that, because I just turned around, Dave, to the bookshelf right behind me, and I got the Essential Avengers Volume 1, the Avengers 1 through 24, which 24 comic book issues in black and white. You remember these Essential Marvel collections?
Dude, I had a whole shelf full of Essential collections. I loved them. It was such a great way, in a dirt cheap way. They were like, what, 15, 18, 20 bucks at the most. And just so many comic books in there. I was able to read, I think I had 9 volumes of Amazing Spider-Man in the Essential collections. Most of my early Spider-Man reading was via those Essentials. That's how I know most of my Spider-Man history.
Yeah, so the cover price listed here is $16.99. This was, of course, probably printed, I would guess, 20 years ago, at least. But I got it at a used bookstore here locally for $8.50. For $8.50, I have 24 comic book issues. Come on. It's not even comparable. And it's black and white, so it brings me back to those days where I would steal my grandma's comics and sports sections of the newspaper and just read Garfield, and stuff like that. So yeah, this is definitely the way to go. And now you're reminding me that I need to go stop by said bookstore again, because it's been far too long.
It's also funny that you mentioned those, because I remember those Essential books very well. And one of the things that they did with those Essential books is, drum roll please, they downgraded the paper. It was a lesser paper quality, more reminiscent of the paper that you find in a paperback novel, right? So they did exactly that. they were able to save a lot of money in the printing by abandoning the paper quality and doing something that's constantly being used anyways. That paper is popping up in every novel you see. So yeah, I love the Essential line with all my heart. I thought it was a great way to reprint some of their earliest comic books.
Now, one of the things, listening back, it was really interesting. I listened back to episode 2 to prep for this episode, and boy, have we come a long way, Dave. There was a lot of ums and uhs, and well, actually, and and I also sounded like I was being held captive in a tin can. So we've come a long way. But one of the things I remember saying back then about digital versus physical is, having children and being able to keep things nice with kids. And this Essential book, I'm not heartbroken because I spent $850 on it probably 6 years ago. So the binding is falling apart. So it's not in great condition, but I could still read it. So it's just a funny kind of callback to that episode.
All right, man. So what is something that has changed about your attitude on how to improve the comic book industry since back from episode 2?
I think something that rang true from all of our strategies last episode, and I think is still going to ring true, probably the thing that is going to be ever present when you connect both of these episodes, is accessibility. Back then I was talking about it should be at the grocery store. It should be where you found your first comic. It should be in the checkout lane at Walmart or Target or insert department store. And I think they've done a decent enough job of updating that. But for the most part, they are still shoved over there in the trading card aisle. That one forgotten one in between the different checkouts. I will say that they have kind of, I was happy to see one of the things that I said, put it in the book section. Well, now I go back to the book sections at Walmart or Target and I see trade paperbacks of like the original Ms. Marvel run that we did by G. Willow Wilson and company. So that's encouraging to see. I saw Infinity Gauntlet back there. And I was happy to see that they were only like 1 or 2 copies left. So they must have been selling well. So that was encouraging. But the thing that I want to update on this is something that I saw yesterday when I went to Five Below. The kids dragged me out of the house. They wanted to go. It was the last day of fall break. They were like, hey, we want to go somewhere. We want to get out of the house. So I said, all right. And I was happy to see comics there. There was a Jason Aaron Thor trade paperback. It was hardcover for $5. That was great. Love that. I think I already had it, so I did not purchase it. However, the thing that I have kind of soured on is these random grab bags of comics. They'll just have, like, the one I saw yesterday was from DC. It was like Wonder Woman 764 or something like that. How is that new reader friendly? How is that going to hook someone? Just like random stray issues of comics that have no connectivity, no entry point. Like, let's just not do that. Now, give me 4 number 1s. That's a different story. But these just random numbered things, those are not going to hook people. And they're certainly not going to hook kids. More on that later.
Yeah, I hate those grab bags, man. I know that even when I was younger and those first started becoming a thing, I remember family members picking up these random grab bags for me, and I always was like, "Yeah, thank you." And then I opened them up, and I was like, "Well, what am I supposed to do with this?" There's Gen 13, number 14, and I'm like, "Well, what about 1 through 13?" I have no idea what the story is even about. I think something like a random grab bag would work a lot better if some of the comic book industry would still be interested in telling done-in-one stories, but they don't really do that anymore. Everything is
what is the common thing? We're writing for the trade.
Writing for the trade, yeah, which is also interesting because that has changed dramatically too. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last few years, they went from 6-issue trades to 5-issue trades to 4-issue trades. So storylines are becoming shorter again, but only because they're including less in a trade while still, charging the same amount. I remember I was shocked when I picked up a trade paperback, and the sort of traditional thing I'd gotten used to was 6 issues per trade, and suddenly it was only 4, and I'm like, well, maybe I should have bought these in individual issues because this is not saving me any money, So, but yeah, I mean, the writing for the trade makes it impossible to, have any kind of joy out of these random grab bags. What it is this is, leftover print run that they couldn't sell off, and they're just randomly putting it in bags, and it's an afterthought. I don't think this is even meant to hook anybody. And I don't think there's really any joy in that. Absolutely, I agree with that. Random grab bags are not it. It's not a good way of putting stuff out there. I will say, one thing that I have appreciated is that in recent years, it seems like rather than destroying overstock, DC and Marvel in particular have just been selling it to that bargain outlet Ollie's. And so when you walk into an Ollie's these days, they have just a metric crap ton of like these really awesome trade paperbacks all over the place that are like at a steep discount because they're just leftovers from a print run that
and it's
would
not
be destroyed otherwise.
No, that one I enjoy because for $10, I'm not getting 4 comics. I'm getting like 20.
That's correct, yeah. So that is much, much smarter, I think, There you are taking a problem, which is that you didn't sell your entire print run, and you're turning it into an advantage by putting it somewhere where comic books are generally not always sought after, in this, bargain outlet. And, at that reduced price, people will pick them up that may not normally. And now that is a smart move. But I agree. The random grab backs are just, I hate those things.
Now, you want to talk about random. I've bought one or two of those from Aldi's. And like, I have them in my classroom on the bookshelf. And they'll be like, what the heck is this? If kids walk by, I'm like, dude, I don't know. It was a random grab bag in my defense. So they'll have something like IDW TMNT, but then they'll also have like Rom the Space Knight or like some Valiant comics from back in the day. Like, it is all ages of comics in so many different ways. The one positive thing that I have seen, you and I love this. DC I've seen this with specifically, but I've also seen it with some Marvel Legends. They're including #1 issues with action figures. Like, that's yes,
genius.
More of that.
Yes.
Yeah,
that should be standard operating procedure.
Superman Rebirth #1 is the one that I've seen the most of in like Walgreens, even Walmart, Target, stuff like that. But also some like Marvel Legends figures I have seen. So that is deeply encouraging, and more of that.
I've appreciated, I know this is adjacent, but I think it needs to be said, I've really appreciated how James Gunn, since he has taken over DC movie division, how he's constantly talking about, the comic books that are behind and inspiring the new upcoming screen adaptations. I think that is the right attitude too. And I think once we get merch, from those movies, like, we get Superman, what is the movie going to be called? Superman Legacy. I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're putting out Superman Legacy action figures, you better believe there should be a comic book bundled with each one of those figures. I think that is the exact smart thing to do. You get a Lois Lane action figure and you get a reprint of Lois Lane #1, like, lean into that. Absolutely. Plus,
especially the
Lois Lane series was good.
With facsimile ones where they're trying to give those away anyway, those are the facsimile editions should be cheaper. But also, like, that's something I love on DC Universe Infinite, which is a big development. There's a big development, Dave, since we recorded that episode so long ago. I don't believe DC Universe Infinite is existed.
We'll talk more about digital in a little bit.
But one thing, before not to put the cart before the horse, is something that I love that both DC and Marvel do a good job of, Comixology as well, is when you get into those apps, and they have, like you said with James Gunn, they have all those in a collection on the app. Marvel Comics, Loki Season 2 is coming out right now. They have the reading guide for Loki and things that you're seeing. So that's something that they're doing a much better job of, Comixology as well.
Yeah, and I think that digital space in particular is so important to the future of the comic book industry. Like I said, we'll talk more about that. I have a lot to say on that, but you're absolutely right. They're doing a much better job trying to tie in with some of the adaptations and stuff. I really like that, and I think you were going to have more about that here pretty soon too.
Listen,
Um,
we're cooking, and we've only gotten through our first one, so let's pick up the pace here, old
all
friend.
right.
Your second point, revisited and new.
Yeah, so then I made a big point out of accessibility to old stories, right? So the idea that you should be able to sit down and read all of Amazing Spider-Man if you want to because you really like the character. But things were just not very accessible at this point, right? Um, the essential line that we just talked about was probably the most affordable way to read some of those older issues. But even while I was buying the Amazing Spider-Man in these essential volumes, I noticed very quickly that they had a print run, that would sell out, they would have another print run, and then they just wouldn't reprint them anymore. So when I would go to stores, I would notice that the prices were starting to become inflated because there was no way to get more, you know? And so keeping these old issues in front of people because they might be quote unquote old, but that doesn't mean they're bad, right? It's like watching an old black and white movie. Come at me, I love my old black and white movies. Is that was, to me, was key. You have this huge back catalog, why are you not making it available? Well, I think some of that issue has been alleviated thanks to digital, and again, I want to spend a lot of time talking about digital at the end. So I think my thing now, rather than worrying about reprinting these old series necessarily, is accessibility. Not accessibility as so far as in stores, but accessibility of the actual content. I think we're really struggling there, man. The American comic book industry, particularly the big two, are really, really bad when it comes to making a story accessible and new reader friendly. We're constantly getting relaunches, blah, 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 and that's all fine and dandy. I understand why they do that. New number ones get a bump. It's a natural jumping on point, whatever. But you're still building on the back of the series that came before that, and the series that came before that, and the series that came before that. And so it is almost impossible at any given time to pick up a random comic book, read it, and get something out of it without having a vast knowledge of history behind you. You just experienced this for our last episode when you were reading The Flash #1, and suddenly you have Impulse and Max Mercury in your face in the first page, right? And you have no context for these characters. And so I think that is a significant problem. And I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on shorter stories done in ones, recap pages. I think it's very, very important to have recap pages. And I'm glad that in some series those have been making a comeback, but for many they had just kind of disappeared. Having a recap on the front page of the story so far to help people get a sense for what's going on, super important. I remember in the Star Wars expanded universe for a little while, they even had a page in the front of like a breakdown of the characters involved. So you had an understanding for who all the people were that were involved. I think that's really smart too. You can very easily, when you're doing a group superhero story like Justice League or something.
I love when Marvel does that.
Yeah, you have just a page where you have like, these are the characters, these are their powers, 1 or 2 sentences on each character. So when you jump into the story, it makes more sense. I think accessibility in that case is key. How do you make the content of your book accessible? They always say, I forget who said this, but every comic book is somebody's first, right? So if you keep that in mind, how can you make sure?
I think that's attributed to Stan Lee, whether or not it's actually Stan Lee.
That's another story.
Who knows?
That's another story, right? But if that's the case, then as an industry, you need to make sure that you're giving people something to come back for, right? Every issue needs to be satisfying in some way. Look, I tell you what, this is something that I worked on for a while, and I've never quite gotten to yet. But I have a concept. It's in one of my drawers here somewhere for an ongoing comic book series. But one of the hooks of how I was wanting to structure it is I wanted to structure it like a television series. Now, not streaming television, because streaming television is a very, very different animal. I'm talking about network television. So the idea was that every issue is a standalone story, but contributes somewhat to a larger arc. And now basically the idea would be you have 10, you go over 1 year, it's a monthly book, you have 10 standalone stories that are all leading up, with B plots and stuff to a 2-part finale. That's issue 11 and 12. That's a season of the comic book, and then you start over again with a new arc, if that makes sense. And so that kind of format
if you're
makes sense to me.
If you're going to steal from Mr. Monk, you better watch yourself. No, I'm just kidding.
Mr. Monk. Yeah.
That I think that's the best I've ever seen that done, where you had this through line, spoiler for a show that came out 20 years ago. But like the fact that you have like a case by case episodic thing, this very Sherlock Holmesian type thing. And then you have the constant through line of him trying to solve his wife's murder. That's the best I've ever seen it done.
I will also, and I know you have paused your watch of this, but I will also say that another series that did this extremely well was Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I know.
Their system.
I agree. It's just I'm so overwhelmed. Starfield. I can't do anything. Starfield has me captive. I can't do anything else.
So the concept of having a different quote unquote big bad every season, right? And you have your standalone stories, but you also have always a little bit contributed in each episode towards the resolution with the big bad of the season. And then you start over the following season with a new big bad. That I thought was really smart too. So using an approach like that in comic books, for example, would assure that every issue is a complete tale in some way. And then there's a satisfaction. That was a really cool story. I wonder if the next one is this cool, And there's still an element of cliffhanger because it's part of an overall arc. But you have a greater focus on done-in-one stories. If I look back at old comic books, they used to have multiple stories per issue, and now it takes multiple issues per story. I think somewhere we might have gone a little bit wrong. If you want floppy comic books, if you want 22-page comic books, then you need to tell a 22-page story, I think. And that doesn't mean you can't have larger arcs, and it doesn't mean you can't collect them in trades and all that, but I think there needs to be a certain amount of, initial incident, rising tension, resolution in each issue.
You know what broke us? And there are elements from this era that we both enjoyed. The Clone Saga broke us.
The Clone Saga broke everybody.
Yeah.
Broke our spirits. But yeah, I think accessibility of content, to end my rant, is really key here.
This is going to be one of our jam-packed episodes, I feel, because we're not even halfway through our points. But I totally agree, and it's far like take this as a note. Me, hearkening back to the olden days as the resident anti-nostalgia person, but I think this is like how many times did we get Peter Parker's origin story told us in like the old ASM stuff? Like we got that told so many different ways. It was almost like biblical, where like you had different accounts of the story, and so like, wait, which one is the right one? Like we had like some of the lore changing with some of the retellings of the Uncle Ben stuff.
Don't get me started on how often I've seen Bruce Wayne's parents get shot.
Exactly, but like at the same time, that gives you a consistent frame of reference, and it's almost like a home base that kind of like repositions you. Like you can like kind of synthesize, if you will, and move on towards this. I also think that older comics now, of course, there wasn't as much stories having been told. Of course, hindsight's 2020, and they didn't have 30 plus years of storytelling to have to pack into this. But even those like little asterisks where it's like see adventures of Spider-Man and Wolverine for the full tale, like even those subtle hints towards the other stuff, like if you're interested in reading up on that, that's a very easy thing to go find and read. As far as this digital now, but like I swear, like, and you can appreciate this as someone who is bilingual as well, when I read a DC comic, there's a certain level of it feels like a foreign language is being spoken. Like I can pick up a new Marvel series. Like I started reading Moon Knight recently. Nerd commendation coming. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I've just been so busy that I haven't got to read it. But and while Moon Knight is a new-ish character to me, I learned him through video games, Marvel Ultimate Alliance and stuff like that. There is at least like a commonality in that world that I understand because I've read Daredevil, because I've read Spider-Man. So me picking up a Moon Knight book is not, resetting the wheel, so to speak. But me, like that Flash book just left me, like it felt like I had been attacked by a speedster when I was done. Like I just kind of sat back in my chair, just like, what just happened? And so I think we've got to go back to like synthesizing. And I've read Justice League's books that have done that, a great job of doing that, of kind of reintroducing these characters via an intro page. The Avengers books did this great for a long time, especially under Hickman, of like, this person is this, like a even like a one panel kind of reorientation. And I think we're missing that. I'm never going to be the person that jumps on the bandwagon of why do we have a new number one. I'm in support of a new number one, especially if it's a new creative team. It's a very clear delineation. This is a new direction we're taking. I'm here for it. Especially, I just think of it as a new volume. Like it's not. I'm not a collector, so you're not gonna like legacy numbering. I'm not interested in any.
Although I do like that compromise from Marvel of having the
do as well
number for that volume and the legacy numbering on there. I do like that as a compromise.
So it's a nice compromise, but I'm never going to be like, why do we have another new number one?
No, it makes sense from an industry perspective, absolutely.
Yeah. So like, because sometimes you get caught in the stodginess of that, and it's really hard to tell someone, oh, you should start reading Superman 862. Like, what? Like, no, I'm not going to start with 862. I'm not going to do that. I'm just not. I don't care if it's a new, like, it took me forever to start Nightwing I did not feel comfortable starting over with Tom Taylor's Nightwing. It was like issue 68 or 69, something like that. Like, I didn't feel comfortable. And then I tried to read the Rebirth, and for the first 20, 30 issues, I nerd commended it. I enjoyed it. And then it got really stupid. And I was just like, okay, maybe I should just jump forward to Taylor's run. But yeah, so it's a difficult needle to thread.
And you can quote me on this, internet. I'm just going to say it. Continuity sucks. I think having 60, 70, 80 years of continuity is incredibly detrimental to the comic book industry. It ties too many creators' hands. It makes it difficult to get people invested because, I have to learn 60 years of minutia to understand this character. If continuity gets in the way, it is not a positive. So continuity sucks. The quotable Dave.
I tend to agree, but with a caveat. Like I don't mind having it as like this apocryphal thing, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, it happened, but we don't need to harp on it. We don't need to focus on it. The thing that drives me nuts, and Nick Spencer, who I defended for the longest time. You remember when I was a Nick Spencer defender? I still ride for his Captain America and Secret Empire. That was an enjoyable storyline. That was still relevant. I think I said that recently in an episode, so I'll say it again. I still go up for his Captain America. However, and Zeb, who I still defend, will always defend. And you and I have had our spats, our civil wars on that. I don't need you to flex. And Dan Slott does this. Oh my God. I don't need you to flex how much of a Spider-Man historian you are. I don't need every little Easter egg. I really don't. I don't need
I just need a good story, man.
I really don't. That's why this Tombstone stuff, and I haven't read comics for a month because Starfield. But this Tombstone stuff with Zeb is like, that's where it's at. Like, I could give a what about some of the other stuff. Like, I don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me because I don't care. I don't care who Peter Parker is romantically entangled with in give a given year, like whatever. But like, I don't need the big man to come up again. I don't need these random plot threads from the 80s to show up again. Like, I'm good. Just tell a good story, bro.
I will. You know what? There's something that you and I can agree on when it comes to current Spider-Man. The Tombstone stuff has been the best stuff. Anything related to Tombstone has been probably the best stuff that was going on in that book.
So where I left off with the wedding and that fiasco, that was like, woof. So I am excited to get back into that. I know that it's taking a different direction, and I'm gonna check it out. But yeah, Tombstone stuff is Tombstone as a whole. Like, there's a spectacular Spider-Man. Here's a nerd commendation. I think I've already nerd commended Spectacular Spider-Man, but there's a Spectacular Spider-Man run. I don't know if they've put it on digital yet, which is a crime, because Spectacular Spider-Man for large swaths is better than Amazing Spider-Man. And I've said that many, many times. There's a run where you get the history between Robbie Robertson and Tombstone. Like, that's some of the best Spider-Man comics you will ever read, is the Robbie Robertson, and like, it kind of informs this whole relationship going forward. But that's a random rant for another day.
All right, let's continue random rant with your second point.
So way back when I said promotion from screen adaptations, our local comic shop did a good job when Age of Ultron came out. They were handing out Secret Wars #1 by Hickman with that sticker that I referenced in the previous episode of "Come to our shop if you want more of this." So like, I thought that was a brilliant cross promotion. I was just like, why are more things, more people, more companies, more people not doing this? Why is Marvel Studios not doing this from their end? Like, this is just one entrepreneur, local entrepreneur, trying to drum up sales and being super smart about it. Like, why is the big corporation whose profits are the bottom line, why are they not interested in this? And so, like, my point from then was promotion from screen adaptations. But I'm gonna go a step further in here, because we've all seen how poorly the actual people who created the stories that are being screen adapted. We've seen how Chris Claremont has been treated. We've seen, help me, Dave, the guy who created Winter Soldier, Ed,
Brubaker.
What's his name? Ed Brubaker. We saw how Ed Brubaker was shafted with the MCU and all of that. And as a Marvel fanboy, when you love something, you criticize it. Take care of your creators. When their baby is making you $1 billion on the screen, take care of them. And, you know, I'm probably carving a role out for me as like the labor guy, but I don't care. Like, I'm ready for, if need be, for comic book artists, and where they're freelance, this might be more difficult. If freelance creators, comic book artists, comic book writers need to go on strike from the big two, from whoever, then so be it. But you need to work that into your contract to take care of your creators, because if you take care of those creators, that's going to draw more people to the occupation, because they're going to be well compensated. That just breeds innovation and new storytelling. And then that's going to make everything so much more accessible. You're going to have more good content to push out, to promote. Like, if you take care of your workers, good stuff follows, let me tell you.
You know, I can't echo this one enough. I think happy creators are willing to create more for you. And if their creation's already making you $1 billion, imagine what their next creation could do for you, right? I don't quite understand how the people who are making all of this stuff possible, you know, by writing the comics that, you know, the next $1 billion movie is based on, how they are not taken care of. It is incredible to me how many comic book creators end up on social media with a post that's like, hey, I'm having health issues, please, you know, help me raise money for my for my hospital bills. Like, that is so far out of the realm of what is acceptable at this point. Like, I understand contracts are contracts, and the industry was built on contracts that basically say this is work for hire, you don't get more, you know. But if you just made $1 billion movie, and if you just made $1 billion movie,
exactly.
and yeah, It's absolutely unacceptable that you don't take care of these creators in some way. There should be some kind of clauses like, hey, if this gets adapted and makes a ton of money, you get this and this percentage of that. Like, that's just good.
Get that written in there, in writing.
Yeah, it should be. It absolutely should be.
All right, Dave, your third and final then and now.
So I said that they need to make digital a priority those years ago in our second episode. And let me tell you, I feel like they kind of did. I think it's fair to say that DC Universe Infinite and Marvel Unlimited both have made pretty big inroads. I think I saw on one of the websites we looked at before the episode that it's like the digital part of the industry was making like 170 million a year or something like that, which is not bad at all. It's a good start. And so I'm glad that they have prioritized digital, because a lot of the stuff that I said about accessibility back then, about, being able to access old series and stuff, has become significantly easier thanks to digital. And driving the costs down has also become a thing thanks to digital. If you can spend $120 a year and you have access to tens of thousands of comic books, the ratio of what you're paying per book to read is actually a lot less than $5-6 in a comic book store, right? So I think digital has taken care of a lot of those kinds of things that I was already talking about back then. Now, I think it is time to start innovating in that space. I think it's time to start trying new things, new formats, in order to make it as comfortable as possible and as easy as possible for people who are not traditional comic book readers to get involved in these platforms. I think one of the really interesting experiments that I've seen is what Marvel Unlimited did with their Infinity comics, right?
I was just about to say, took the words from my mouth.
Yeah, that you just keep scrolling, right? Like comic books specifically made for the digital landscape.
And the artists that have fully embraced that medium are cooking with it.
Cooking. You're not kidding, cooking. Really, really cool stuff in Marvel's Infinity line, right? So that is the correct attitude to have. Like, now that you're moving on digital, and now that you're putting your back issues on there, that's all grand. But now, how can you enhance the experience? How can you capture a generation that is a digital native? How can you get the TikTok crowd? Like, that is really the question here. If you can capture that crowd, the people who are constantly online, because they're on social media or they're watching YouTube videos or whatever, if you can capture that crowd, then you're going to grow the industry like nobody's business. But for that, you have to start thinking, how do I do that? Because it's not just take what we do in print and put it on there digitally. That is 0 point. That is the bare minimum, right? Now you have to start playing around with digital. Now you have to innovate. Now, what does that look like? I don't know. I'm not a great technology innovator. I use technology, but I'm not exactly creating it over here. But there are probably things that you can try to do. Short, bite-sized comics. I don't know, that you can read in 5 minutes. I don't know. Maybe something like that, since we have a generation that is very much in the quick fix situation, right? But how do you capture that audience? That's the key, I think, to growing the comic book industry again. Now that we're digital, how can we make digital work? I don't have any good answers here. Just that it is something that much smarter people and much more knowledgeable people than me need to sit down and really think about. Marvel's Infinite line is a first step. Formatted so it's very easily read on a screen, on your phone, on a tablet. Great, fantastic. No page turns, just keep scrolling. That is a good first step. But what else can you do to capture those digital natives? And I think really, I sincerely believe that digital is the future of comic books. I think everything is going digital. As much as I hate to say that as an old fogey, I like my physical comics. I like my physical media. I don't even want to talk about how many physical game discs I have still from Xbox 360, and Xbox One. It's one of the reasons I can't go get a Series S, because I'd lose like 300 games or something that I can't play because it doesn't have a darn disk drive. Like, I love physical media. But I also have to acknowledge, for example, on my Steam Deck, if I want to play something on my Steam Deck, it's going to be digital. If you watch something on, that if you want to watch something, movie or television series wise, more often than not, you're on a streaming service now. It's all digital, So I think comics is going to go a similar way. I don't think that print is going anywhere, but I do think that eventually we're going to reach a tipping point, and things are going to shift more and more to the digital space. And whatever company comes up with an innovative way of delivering comic book content in the digital space is going to be, I don't know, the Xbox of comics, like with their Game Pass. Like, they were pretty much the first people on the block to really make that work, and they're still ahead of the curve, even though Sony is trying to play catch up with their own subscription services, right? So I'm waiting, DC, Marvel, whomever, to innovate in that digital space a little bit and to come up with a different way to do comics in the digital space. And I think once they figure that out, boom, it's going to make a huge impact on the industry.
As much as this element of social media makes you and I cringe, especially with your journalism background, with my journalism enthusiasm, we'll go with. I've always supported journalism. I was a writer back in middle school myself. I've written freelance articles. Embrace the clickbait. Embrace the clickbait nature of social media, of TikTok, of Twix, of Facebook even, and just launch into that from Marvel's perspective, on their pages, on DC's pages, on IDW's pages. Be like, remember that time Superman died? Read about it here. Or remember that time Scott Summers abandoned his wife and newborn child because his old flame was reborn? Read more about that drama here. Like, come embrace the mess. And like, just this, so many people with the advent of social media, and I said this before earlier, like, there is no attention span. Whether it is diagnosed as ADHD or not, 0 attention span, -5 attention span. So embrace that and try and capitalize on that. Have a link to the actual comics. Oh, you want to read the first part of that? Boom, here. Just don't make it a bunch of hoops and bounds. Like, Marvel does a great thing with, if you buy a physical copy, you get a code for a digital one. It's still a whole nother streamline that process. Here's a code that you have to go to this website to enter it. Then you have to download this app to actually read it. Nope, streamline it. Create a URL, a link that takes you to that issue, and you read it then and now. Because we have streamlined so much of our media. Like, we got to make it quick. Like, we don't have time for that.
Yep, I love that. All right, Chris, that brings us to your last change of mind that you've had since our second episode.
Well, it's funny because both of our final points were just doubling down on the previous one, or pivoting or tinkering with the previous one. So back then, I said the youth movement with rewards and incentives. I didn't get to that part in re-listening. I probably talked about like the book it scenario where I would be at Pizza Hut every other week because I had read so many books and I was getting free pizza. I am now updating that, Dave. We've talked about this as educators. There's been a lot of teacher talk on social media, and kind of a revelation that, yes, the pandemic set us back, but there's a whole bunch of deep-seated issues. And one of the things is not only are kids struggling to read, they have 0 desire to read. We have to drag them to the library to pick out an independent reading book once a week. Drag them, our ELA teachers. We have to bribe them with incentives to read and do anything. So we have to kind of evangelize for reading. And Dave, you remember back in the day, I don't know if they had this in Germany, but do you remember the Got Milk ads?
Yeah, they were all over the place. Even in Germany, I remember seeing some milk mustache ads. I think that was mostly an American thing, but for some reason, I remember seeing some in my youth. So I'm not 100% sure if it was import comics that I was looking at the time or what, but I remember seeing them.
Okay, so let me tell you, those Got Milk ads, they got me hook, line, and sinker. That was the biggest thing for me growing up as a kid in the 90s. If you put my favorite athletes on one of those Got Milk ads in a magazine or in a newspaper or on a commercial, I was there because I emulated those people. If you I got in trouble because like the whole gallon of milk would be gone because like, oh my God, Kris, what are you doing? That's your third glass of milk. They said I had to drink 3 glasses of milk. Okay. I've never broken a bone. And I always like use that as my calling card. They're like, listen, I used to drink 3 glasses of milk a day as a kid. Like we could not keep milk in the house because of that effectiveness. We've got to have some kind of evangelism for readings, for reading for these kids. And if it's Chris Evans doing a reading TikTok, or if it's Robert Downey Jr. doing Jason Momoa doing like a TikTok for like, this is what you should read. I'm reading this comic and so should you. Or like, I'm reading this. Like these kids do not want to read. They want to play video games. They want to watch YouTube videos. They do not want to read. There's even an old Jim Gaffigan joke about like, you know what I enjoyed about people who are always like, oh, the book is better than the movie. You know what I enjoyed about the movie? No reading. And that sentiment has crept into this next generation. They have no desire to read. Until we fix that problem, and if we tack that head on, that's how we save reading as a whole, not just comic books.
Preach it. Like, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that reading in particular is something even more so than the comic book industry that's in desperate need of saving. And if you have more readers, then you have more potential readers for the comic book industry. So it is definitely something that that works hand in hand. Yeah, it is super regrettable how digital native somehow now has come to mean non-reader. I find that so sad, and I'm hoping that somebody at some point is going to start advocating for reading to become more important again. And to kind of push it a little bit and like you said, have a campaign that says, hey, listen, kids, reading is cool, or whatever you want to do, like we have to do something to inspire these kids to get reading again. And so I wholeheartedly agree. That is 0.0. Like we just have to make people readers again.
Now, one of the things that I enjoy that our school library does, especially when the book fair comes around, is these graphic novels of these popular characters, of Kamala Khan, of Miles Morales, of Diana. Even I scoop them up when they're at the book fair. I was crushed when I didn't get the new Miles one, but I have those in my classroom. Like if kids were wanting to read or what have you, or I read them. And something that both companies have done really well, and I've nerd commended some of them, is these young adult graphic novels as kind of like a bridge between two worlds. And so more of that.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk. What did we miss? What are ways that you would improve comic book sales, the industry as a whole? What did we miss? What are we tone deaf on? Help us out. Hit us up on social media at Nerd by Word across all those platforms. And when we come back, our second to last installment of Nerd Nightmare. All right, so the month of October, my free time, my nerd commendations have been hijacked by none other than my lovely co-host. So Dave, it's your turn. I'm going to turn this over to you.
My God, don't I love October, because once again it is time for Nerd Nightmare. And this week, I once again decided to do something a little out of the ordinary. Last week we really captivated Kris with The Cabin in the Woods, and I thought this is something in a similar vein where it does something a little unexpected and different tonally, and I wondered if this might be a movie for him. So we're talking about the 2019 horror/thriller movie Ready or Not, starring Samara Weaving, Adam Brody, Andy McDowell, Mark O'Brien. The movie, here is the official tagline. Grace couldn't be happier after she marries the man of her dreams at his family's luxurious estate. There's just one catch. She must now hide from midnight until dawn while her new in-laws hunt her down with guns, crossbows, and other weapons. As Grace desperately tries to survive the night, she soon finds a way to turn the tables on her not-so-lovable new relatives. Kris, I am going to freely admit this was one of the best theater experiences that I have had in the last 10 years or so. I had a really, really good time with this movie when I saw it with a crowd, and I'm very interested to hear your take on this one.
Okay, so I'm going to try my best to keep our family friendly rating that we have, but I don't think that your clicky pen or the bleep button is going to help here. So I'm going to just try and just be a good boy here. My biggest overall thing is, and I texted this to you, but I'm going to try and clean up my colorful language. Alex is one of, how can I say this? Oh, Alex is lame. He's the worst. He's terrible. He's one of those like faux sensitive bros that like, oh, I have feelings and this is, you changed my life. But then when it comes to like doing actual things, like actions speak louder than words, bro. You should have just eloped with this girl. You didn't even have to marry her. Okay. If marriage is the final thing, if you truly cared about her, y'all could just go, as the preachers would say, go live in sin. Go live in sin rather than put this girl's life at stake. And how did that work out for you, Bubba?
Kris, you make it sound like so much fun when you say that. Go live in sin. It sounds like a blast.
which is ironic because your family sold their soul to the devil. the devil, ha Satan. But yeah, like, so like that was my biggest takeaway. I was just frustrated and like, anytime, no, in all seriousness, anytime Adam Brody shows up on my screen, I'm a happy man. I forgot how religiously I watched the OC back in high school and how his twitchy, dorky, dweeby energy just vibes with me. And like how he's evolved that style over time where like he's kind of like the cool guy in this movie, which is weird coming from him. Like, he makes sense in Shazam and horribly, criminally underused in those Shazam movies. As much as I enjoyed the first one, and to a lesser degree, the second one. Like, he's the perfect encapsulation of the older version of that character. The kid's name is escaping me, but that's neither here nor there. But
it's Freddy.
Freddy, thank you. But yeah, this was a really enjoyable one. And just like a really interesting take on like that final girl trope. Some of the humor was a little bit on the nose for me. Like the final line is in-laws, and I'm just like, okay. But other than that, like it was a really enjoyable one. The sister just taking out everybody except for the person was pretty funny as like this coked out degenerate loser. And then you know what, I take that back. I take back everything I said. My biggest overall take was this was a really interesting kind of social critique, satire on the uber wealthy in America. And like how they kind of sell their souls and to keep it in the family and like to keep up appearances, to keep their status. And even amidst controversy, like you have the daughter with substance abuse issues. They keep that in the family. Like the parents are like just apologize for her. Like they just don't even hold her accountable. You have like the prodigal son returning. But yeah, this was just a wild. This was a wild film. Wild.
Yeah, I found it super super enjoyable. I really liked the sense of humor of it. I didn't expect it to be as funny as it ended up being when I watched it first. And Samara, however you pronounce her name, Weaving is such a star in this movie. I think she just takes this role and just knocks it out of the park. She's so charismatic. I had to be reminded of her because she is like. Spoilers! In the most recent Scream movie, she's like the first victim, so she dies in like the first 5 minutes of the movie. But even there, like 5 minutes in the movie, she completely commands the screen, and I'm like, why is this woman not in everything? Like, she is so good in this movie. I just want to see more of her. And I really, really enjoy, this idea of survival in an unfamiliar environment and you're not sure who you can trust and all that. I think that works really well here with a more humorous twist. But there was a movie a while back, maybe something for Nerd Nightmare next year, called You're Next, I believe. And that one worked in a very similar sort of way. You know, you have an outsider coming in with a family and there's this whole drama going on and then people start dying. It's a little more straight-laced and serious, but also a really, really strong movie. So this, like, trying to survive against impossible odds kind of thing, the tension that comes out of that, that's really, really enjoyable in these kinds of movies. And I think it worked to a T here.
It's funny you say that about Samara Weaving, and you and I had texted about this a little bit. She kind of suffers from the success of Margot Robbie because she looks very similar. She's an Australian-born actress as well. But I did, and I was looking for a nerd news story this week, and one of the headlines from the Hollywood Reporter is that this new movie that she's a part of has been picked up called Azrael, and it's about, and this sounds like a great kind of premise for a horror movie. It's set in a world, and I'm reading directly here from a Hollywood Reporter. Azrael is set in a world in which no one speaks and centers on a devout female-led community that hunts down a young woman, the self-titled character played by Weaving, who has escaped her imprisonment. Recaptured by its ruthless leaders, Azrael is to be sacrificed to pacify an ancient evil. Oh, this sounds familiar. That resides deep within the surrounding wilderness, but she will stop at nothing to ensure her own freedom and survival. So this might be Ready or Not under another name and a different kind of filter, if you will. But no, you know, that sounds interesting all the same.
Yeah, I'm ready for it. I just want to see her in something again, because even like that short taste of her acting in the most recent Scream movie, and I was like, you know, why is she not in more stuff? She is so charismatic, and she does, you know, horror movie roles in particular so well. She should be all over the place at this point.
I think the image of like her in some cool orange Converse and like ripping up her wedding dress, like that whole thing, we should not lose that. Like, this is her wedding night. Like, she's trying to do the standard, like, consummating the marriage thing, and then the creepy Aunt Helene is just like peeping out, and that's a fascinating thing too, of like how Helene switched it up, because she was, you know, someone who had to live through that, and then for her to be the bookend and like leading the charge on this, she was like, no, y'all killed my husband, no, it's time to kill her. But like, yeah, it was really wild. But like that image of her in her well-worn Converse and having to rip up her dress and stuff, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I really, really like this. Not as earth-shatteringly innovative as The Cabin in the Woods, but a lot of
nothing.
fun.
That's going to be a high watermark, and unfortunately, that movie did not perform as well for whatever reason. There's a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but like that's going to be the standard for me moving forward.
Well, I am so glad I was able to introduce you to that one.
All right, that wraps up another episode of Nerd Byword. I've got one more nightmare to suffer through next week before we get back to Nerd Commendations. But if you like what you heard today, we thank you so much for supporting us, and you can find us on whatever your favorite podcasting platform is, whether that's Apple, Spotify, or nerdbyword.com.
And of course, you can find us on social media, because we would like to know what you think of what you heard. Find us on Twix, Instagram, and pretty much wherever there is a social media platform. At least one of us is there. You can find us at Nerd Byword, or individually at That Nerd Dave and at That Nerd Kris. The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.